You are listening to WCAT Radio, your station for quality Catholic programming. Your selected program will begin right after a word from our sponsor, GroupM7.com, a web design and hosting company. Log on to GroupM7.com today and let them know that WCAT Radio sent you.
You know, my finest childhood memories was the Saturday morning movies for about 4 bits each. My brother and I could split a Coke and a big box of popcorn and watch movies about Tarzan, Jane, and their Amazon River adventures. Well, maybe that's where Jeff Bezos took his name. His Amazon.com is now the largest online retailer in the world. I'm Michael Mahfood with Group M7, the oldest and largest website design firm in East Texas. And here's my point, and as usual, it's a good one. If your website is modern and up-to-date, mobile and search engine friendly, it matters not whether you sell a product or provide information about your goods and services, your sales justifiably will increase just like theirs. The world uses the internet. We can improve your website and your email. Look at our giant portfolio at GroupM7.com. Since 1995, there's only one web and there's only one group, and it's us. It's Group M7.
You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Hey, I need to add a post-episode prescript here, and what I mean by that is I'm recording this after I recorded the bulk of this episode, but you're hearing it before the actual podcast episode, and that's because I mentioned in this podcast that the U.S. government is going to be putting out a report on what they term UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon, and that was part of what inspired me to do this particular podcast episode. Well, about a day or two after I recorded the bulk of this, they put out that report. Now, fortunately, pretty much nothing in it actually winds up contradicting anything I'm going to say. The initial leaks as to what that report was going to say were more or less pretty accurate, so I don't have to redo the whole thing, but I just wanted to make a note of that because it came out after I recorded the bulk of this, but before I put this podcast out. So in this episode, I mentioned that report several times and that it's forthcoming, but by the time you hear this, it's no longer forthcoming. And very, very loosely speaking, the U.S. government put out the report on what they termed unidentified aerial phenomenon, roughly UFOs, and said that they studied 144 cases, which I believe were reported from various branches of the military and other federal agencies and things, and said in one of these cases we can confirm what it was, which ironically enough was a deflated weather balloon, which if you follow any kind of stuff in UFOs, that's absolutely hilarious because a lot of supposed real UFO sightings got blamed on weather balloons. So that's actually really funny, I think, that the real reports, they say, yeah, one of them actually was a deflated weather balloon. Now, the remaining 143, the U.S. government says, we don't know what they are. We can pretty much confirm they're not advanced American technology. We can pretty much confirm they were physical objects due to the fact that we have multiple sources of data on this. That is, there was like an eyewitness, there was a video recording, and there was radar data, or maybe only 2 of the 3 or something along those lines. But beyond that, we can't really say. We can't say whether or not they're highly advanced technology from foreign adversaries like Russia or China or someone else. And we can't say or rule out whether they're alien in nature. I just had to add that in at the front here since they actually put out that report before I could get this podcast out. So that's the end of this prescript, and you can get to the regular podcast now. All right. Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Examined Life with Phil. I'm Phil, and this is my attempt to examine my life and encourage you to examine yours, as I say every time now. I guess that's kind of become like my theme or opening tagline to this show. And I know I said last episode that I was going to get back into doing more stuff about stories, but I actually changed my mind, and I'm going to do something a little different this time. I'm going to talk about why aliens are almost certainly demonic. Or actually, a better, more accurate way to say this would be something more like why at least some reports of alien encounters are very likely to be demonic. So for those of you who've done stuff in academia, you know that one of the ways they like to train you on how to title your essays and papers and things along those lines is you make one snappy start, and then you do a colon, and then you explain your snappy start in better ways. Now, because I'm running a podcast and not writing an essay as a consequence of that, that doesn't really work for titles for my podcast because that would just be too long. So the title of this podcast, Why Aliens Are Almost Certainly Demonic, is actually a little bit misleading. It would be more accurate to say why at least some claims of alien activity are very likely to be demonic, or maybe it'd be better to say why demons are a better explanation of most claims of alien abductions than actual aliens are, or something along those lines. But that title's just too long to work into a podcast, so I couldn't really do that. Sorry about that. I hope you don't feel like I've deceived you, but if you did feel that way, well, hey, I put my disclaimer right at the front of the podcast, so that's that. So I did actually a fair amount of research into this, I want to say like 6 or 7 years ago, and came to a pretty similar conclusion to what I'm going to tell you in this podcast now. I don't remember exactly what inspired me to do the research then. I remember that I was working for Wyndham and doing logistical work for them, and so I had a lot of time to listen to podcasts and things like that, so maybe I came across a podcast talking about this. I'm not quite sure. But the main inspiration I have for doing this podcast right now is that the U.S. federal government is going to be releasing a report on activities of UFOs, or as they're calling them now, unidentified aerial phenomenon. I might have that wrong. I could have the abbreviation there wrong, but they came up with a little bit of a different name to identify UFOs because they didn't want to bring in all the baggage that comes with people claiming they saw a UFO. And I want to say this was last year as part of one of their Congress's budgets or appropriation bills. They put in there that the military and the federal government needs to compile all the information and data that they have or have gathered from various agencies on UFOs or unidentified aerial phenomenon and things along those lines, try and research it out, come to some conclusions, and present it to Congress. And the vast majority of this report is going to be publicly available. As I understand it, there's going to be a classified annex, so maybe the conspiracy theory people will appeal to that to say, hey, there's still things they're not telling us. But it's going to be released to the public, and supposedly that is happening at some point this week. In fact, since I'm driving right now on another long errand, it could be happening even as I'm recording this podcast, so maybe by the time this gets out, that'll have been released. Early reports as to what it's going to say is going to be rather disappointing for everyone, I think, because the early reports, that is, our government leaks like a sieve. Some people have already seen early drafts of the report, and there's leaking what it says. And it more or less says that, hey, yeah, these phenomena are real. Our fighter pilots, especially in the Navy, encounter them all the time. But we don't have any explanation as to what they are. We are pretty certain they're not our own advanced technology. We're pretty certain they're not a foreign adversary's advanced technology like China or Russia. And we also can't rule out that there's some type of natural phenomenon, and we can't rule out that there's some type of extraterrestrial alien craft, although we can't confirm that either. Which, if those reports are true, that basically means the government's saying, yeah, we encounter these things and we just don't have any idea of what they are or any explanation, which I would be actually pretty surprised for our government to put out a report like that, because our government doesn't tend to like admitting it doesn't know things, it doesn't understand things. So, right from the get-go, as I often do when I'm discussing any kind of topic, when you're talking about questions of UFOs, alien abductions, and things along those lines, we need to make a number of different distinctions, because you can't actually lump all these types of claims of UFO sightings, alien abductions, and things along those lines together. Some of them are vastly different than other ones. Some of them are much more credible than other ones. Some of them, it's obvious that people were lying or crazy. In other ones, it's not so obvious. So, the best thing to do is to draw some distinctions and not treat all claims as alike, because they're not. So, just easy example, although the term now has a lot of baggage, a UFO, just by definition, if you're using strictly the definition and not trying to include all the baggage, just means unidentified flying object, which literally means somebody saw something flying in the sky and they don't know what it is. Now, obviously it doesn't follow from that it's an alien spacecraft, or that it's demonic, or that it's extra-dimensional, or something really weird. People have misidentified, and it's been documented that people have misidentified normal human aircraft, like planes and helicopters and drones and things like that, as UFOs. People have misidentified natural phenomena as UFOs. There was a case that happened in England, I don't remember exactly when, probably like 20 or 30 years ago, where dozens or maybe even hundreds of witnesses claimed they were all seeing a UFO in the sky. And then, like, even the police came out and looked at it and stuff like that. And then when somebody did some research into it, they realized, oh, these people were seeing the planet Venus. Because at times, you can actually see the planet Venus with your naked eye. And these people just saw the planet Venus and concluded UFO, because they didn't understand what it was. Now, perfectly natural explanation for that. There might be some interesting psychological research you could get into in that as to why these people saw the planet Venus and concluded, hey, that's a weird thing instead of just a normal astronomical thing in the nighttime sky. But the point being, these people saw a UFO. Research was done later, and we were able to more or less surmise that no, that wasn't an unidentified thing. That was just the planet Venus. So likewise, it's going to be the case that if you do the hard work of digging into claims of UFO sightings and other things like that, you're going to be able to immediately rule some of these out as just misidentifications of airplanes and helicopters, drones, and other natural phenomena. Now, it could, extrapolating from that, it's probably also the case that there are some cases where it isn't immediately obvious to us that, oh, that was an airplane, that was a helicopter, that was the planet Venus, where that really is the explanation. People just simply saw something man-made, didn't know what it was, and concluded that, hey, that's a UFO. Example of that comes to my mind is that the stealth fighter, I think it was the F-117 Nighthawk. I could be getting my nomenclatures wrong about that. Well, anyhow, it was actually flying like combat missions and stuff like that, or missions in some sense, maybe not in direct combat, around the world for like 15 or 20 years before it was declassified. So it's entirely possible somebody saw that, didn't know what it was, and concluded UFO. Same thing with the B-2 stealth bomber. That was flying in testing in other phases and doing other things long before it was declassified. And if you look at that and you've never seen one of those before and you don't know that the U.S. government has developed it, and you saw something like that flying in the sky, would you conclude UFO? Well, maybe. So it's entirely possible that some UFO reported sightings are things along those lines. It's also entirely possible that there are some natural phenomena that some people misidentify as alien spacecraft, or UFOs, or whatever term you want to use, that science and contemporary physics just haven't identified yet, that are, like, say, exceptionally rare, but do happen. And those could be misreported as UFOs. And likewise, it's almost certainly the case that some people are lying or crazy when they're reporting these kind of things. Example I can think of where it's highly likely somebody was lying. There was a reported alien abduction case where some loggers claimed one of their friends was abducted by aliens, and they made that movie Fire in the Sky based off of that. But when you dig into the details, it's very likely that that was a hoax that the loggers set up to try to get some more time to fulfill their logging contract, because the guy who was leading that was really far behind and wasn't going to get paid, so at least not as much. And the guy who was abducted, his parents and family didn't seem particularly worried about the fact that he was abducted and missing and things like that, which strongly suggests, oh, they were probably lying because they had a motivation to lie in that case. And likewise, in that same vein, it's almost certainly the case that some reported cases of alien abductions are a medical condition called sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis is a condition where it's kind of like you go into REM sleep when you're not fully asleep, or something along those lines. So you'll basically feel paralyzed because your body is supposed to be paralyzed in the sense that it doesn't move when you're having dreams, so you don't injure yourself. And so that's still going on, so you can't move. And you'll also get a sense that there's another person or presence in your room or the place where you're sleeping or something like that. And people who have it report that it's absolutely terrifying. And so it's quite likely, I'd say very, very likely, that some cases of reported alien abductions are explainable by sleep paralysis, which is an actual medical condition. But rule all that out, And you still have some reported instances of UFO sightings, alien abductions, and other similar things, which don't neatly fit into those categories, which aren't so easily explainable away. Even if you account for the possibility of things like natural phenomena we don't understand, these instances don't appear like what you'd expect a natural phenomenon to be. So, because I'm inspired to do this by the U.S. government report, best examples of this I'm aware of that I'll point to now are the videos that have come out of Navy pilots encountering flying UFOs. And in most of these instances, what makes them so compelling is you have at least one, in several cases, multiple eyewitnesses who are trained experts on identifying things in the air. That is, these are Navy pilots. They're trained to identify aircraft of various kinds. That's their whole job, is to identify aircraft and threats. So they're reporting that they've seen it. You have video evidence that shows the thing they're reporting on from the fighter plane. And on top of that, at least in some of these cases, you actually have radar data that was recorded either from the plane itself or maybe the aircraft carrier or other ships in the carrier group that were communicating with the fighter plane. And all of these three items of evidence, the video evidence, the eyewitness evidence, and the radar data, link up. They're confirmatory. They all more or less say the same thing. Like the pilot says, oh, we saw the UFO go this way, the video says that, and the radar data confirms it as well. Now, the reason why this is such a big deal is that in the past, skeptics of UFO claims, and I would say you could probably include me as one of them, at least in some sense, would always have a good rejoinder to the idea of, well, people saw a UFO. They'd be like, well, if aliens are really coming here, why don't we ever see radar data? Why don't we have good video evidence of it? Why is it that it's always some guy out in a field away from civilization by himself that sees it? Why don't we have multiple lines of corroborating evidence if there really is some physical thing there? Because you should be able to get video or photographic evidence, eyewitness reports, and since there's radar data all over the world now because of air traffic control and things like that, shouldn't you at least be able to possibly see some kind of radar data? So the point being, at least in the past, that was, I think, a pretty good objection. But now, that's not a good objection anymore because we have all that. And so the most reasonable thing to conclude from the data that's been either released or leaked, depending on how you want to look at it, is that this phenomena, whatever you want to call it, a UFO, an aerial phenomenon or whatever, that the phenomenon does happen. So then the conclusion is, so then the next question is, well, what is it? What's the best explanation of it? So the one that's really popular that people are talking about now is that at least 2 U.S. Navy pilots saw something that they described as a tic-tac, and they have video data of it. The video data matches their eyewitness accounts, and there's radar data of it as well. And it was flying around doing things that were, based on our current laws of understanding the laws of physics, physically impossible. It was turning way too fast, accelerating way too fast, and other things along those lines which just should not be able to happen. And it appeared to be flying without the use of any kind of a noticeable engine, motor, propeller, and without any wings. So, what's the best explanation of this? And this is where we go right back to this topic that I've talked about many times here, which is inference to the best explanation. We know, in as much as we can know things, that this phenomena is real. Now, what's the best explanation of it? Is it aliens coming to the world to survey the planet and check us out? Is it aliens coming to the world for more nefarious purposes? Is it an unidentified natural phenomenon? Or is it, as I'm going to argue is far more likely, is this stuff demonic in nature? So, for the purpose of running through this, I'm just going to be ignoring those claims that can be written off as mistakes, crazy people, misidentifications, and things along those lines, and trying to focus on, that's the reason why I talked about this Tic Tac one, because it's a very, very well evidenced claim, and so should be taken seriously. So, as part of doing this, I'm going to be relying on the research of a guy named Jacques F. Vallée, who, as I understand, is a French researcher, who has, him and some other secular UFO researchers have developed a theory that they call the extra-dimensional hypothesis. And their idea is that UFO and alien phenomena are not aliens coming to the world, like in, say, Star Trek or the Mass Effect games or Star Wars or something like that. They're not physical human or humanoid sentient beings like you and I are. There's something coming from another dimension. And as I understand it, this theory has at least some acceptance in secular UFO researchers, although I don't know how widely accepted it is. But he points to a number of different bits of data that I'm going to point out here. And I'm drawing a lot of this from an essay he wrote called 5 Arguments Against the Extraterrestrial Origin of Unidentified Flying Objects. Now, I will note, this essay was published way back in 1990. However, from what I understand of his arguments, with one possible exception, I don't think they actually are the kind of thing that are going to go out of date. Actually, I think the data for them has gotten significantly stronger in the last 31 years. And the other researcher who I'll make a little bit of use of is a guy named Gary Bates, who's written a book or two on the UFO phenomena from a Christian perspective. And Bates attempts to tie his critique of UFO culture and his viewing the phenomena through a Christian perspective into anti-evolutionary ideas, where he's saying, hey, aliens only make sense on evolution there, so demons are deceiving us to get us to believe in evolution. Well, that might be a bit of an unfair summary, but he does tie it into evolutionary theory, and I don't think you really necessarily have to do that. But at the same time, quite a bit of his research is still worth your time to look at, even if you accept evolutionary theory. So in that essay he published about 30 years ago now, Jacques Vallée gives 5 arguments for why he thinks aliens are most likely, or UFOs are most likely, extra-dimensional rather than extraterrestrial. So I'll just tell you quickly what these arguments are, and then I'll go into them in a bit more depth and add some of my own thoughts and notations. First, he says that unexplained close encounters are far more numerous than is required for any physical survey of the Earth. That is, there's far more reports of aliens and UFOs than are necessary for an alien race to do any kind of scientific survey. Second, the humanoid or bipedal body structure that is reported the aliens have by people who claim to have seen them is unlikely to have actually originated on another planet anywhere. Third, he says the reported behavior in thousands of abduction cases contradicts the hypothesis that genetic or scientific exploration or testing is being done on the human species. Fourth, he argues historically that this type of phenomenon of unidentified flying objects and things that seem very much like alien abductions has actually been reported throughout human history. And 5, the apparent ability of UFOs to manipulate space and time suggests radically different alternatives, as our current understanding of physics says these things should be impossible. It's not just the case that we don't have the technology to do these kind of things, it's that the laws of physics tell us nothing should be able to do that. And so what I want to take from these, and I'll go into a little bit more detail here, I want to argue that if the extra-dimensional hypothesis of UFOs and alien and abduction cases and let's just call them unexplained close encounters for ease, if that works, then it actually makes more sense to say, well, these aren't just like extra-dimensional beings, these are demonic, because that actually fits very, very well with what you would expect demons to say and do, especially if you, like me, already have a Christian worldview that allows for demons and or supernatural entities that are evil or malevolent. Well, look at the aliens in that light, and they start looking a whole lot like demons. So, the first argument. The unexplained close encounters, there's way, way, way too many of them to account for any kind of scientific or survey or exploratory study by an alien race or even races. And here what I mean by unexplained close encounter, I'm borrowing this term from Vallée, where what he means by it is something that's not easily explainable away by misidentification, by somebody being crazy, or it's something more than just somebody saw something in the sky that was gone in 5 seconds. It's something where it's much more substantial, much more like what was going on with this craft that was described as a Tic Tac by those Navy pilots. So, back in 1990, part of what he did in this essay is he compiled reports and attempted to estimate, well, how many people have claimed to see a UFO or encountered aliens, the unexplained close encounters, that are not easily explainable away. He estimated back in 1990 that was somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 cases, depending on the criteria you've used. Now, that was 31 years ago, so I think we can imagine that number has actually gone up since then. I mean, I haven't done the research myself, but people haven't stopped reporting encounters with UFOs and aliens in the last 30 years. So that number's almost certainly gone up. He estimated 5,000 as a conservative example, and then did a little speculation, which maybe isn't quite as well grounded, where he said, hey, a lot of people who report these things, a lot of people don't report these types of encounters, so the number's actually probably higher than that. And then did some more extrapolation back into history and concluded, hey, you've probably got millions of encounters. Now, I don't think that necessarily follows as easily as he says it does, but it is fair to say that these types of unexplained close encounters probably do happen more often than they're reported. And there is good data from history to suggest that similar things at least were going on in the past. There's historical data where people reported very similar things. So, just do a little bit of a thought experiment here. Suppose there's not just, say, one alien race that's coming to do like a scientific survey or study of the Earth, of human beings and the other animals and creatures that live here. They're looking to assess the natural resources or whatever, even something maybe more malicious. Do they really need to come here 5,000 times to get the data they need? Especially assuming that they're far more advanced than we are and therefore should be able to do such kind of surveys and studies far more efficiently and effectively. Well, no, it doesn't make sense. That would be, especially when you consider the resources that would be necessary to travel to vast distances in space, that would seem like an awfully big waste of resources to come more than 5,000 times just to do that kind of thing. And even if you're talking about, say you want to assume they have a much more malicious intention, like they're looking to scout out our planet to take us over. Well, again, it's very difficult to see why they would need to come here 5,000 times to do that. And pretty much every other explanation you can come up with where a terrestrial species, that is a species that developed and lives on a planet just like you and I do, live on planet Earth, it's very, very difficult to come up with a reason they come here more than 5,000 times. And even if you extrapolate that, hey, there's different alien species, like there's 5 of them, well, then you've got an average of well over 1,000 times each. You'd have to end up with something like 1,000 or more different alien species who are all coming here to do these kind of things before it's the number of reported unexplained close encounters starts making sense. And the trouble with that is if there's 1,000 different alien races who are coming here to the Earth, well, then the Fermi paradox, we wouldn't have it, because we should be seeing radio and communication evidence from them. We should see all kinds of evidence of civilizations out in the universe if there really are 1,000 or more alien races out there. Now, coupled also with that is the fact that the vast majority of unexplained close encounters always occur at night. Well, not always, I misspoke. The vast majority of them occur at night. There are people who see UFOs in the daytime. There are people who claim to have encountered aliens in the daytime. But they're rare. They're very rare. Most of them happen at night. So again, why would a terrestrial species need to or want to come primarily at night? It doesn't make sense. But conversely, if aliens are extra-dimensional as Valet says, or demonic as I'm claiming, then the number of instances makes perfect sense, because, hey, demons aren't interested in doing a scientific survey of the planet. They're interested in doing harm to as many human beings as they can. Likewise, demonic encounters, from what I've heard reported, tend to occur more frequently at night because people are more easily frightened and cajoled and things like that at night than they are at other times. It's a lot easier to scare somebody at night than it is in the daytime. So about this, Vallée says, and I'm going to quote him here, "It should be kept in mind that the surface of the Earth is clearly visible from space, unlike Venus or other planetary bodies surrounded in a dense atmosphere. Furthermore, we have been broadcasting information on all aspects of our various cultures in the form of radio for most of this century, and in the form of television for the last 30 years, the last 60 years now. So most of the parameters about our planet and our civilization can be readily acquired by unobtrusive, remote, technical means. The collecting of physical samples would require landing, but it could also be accomplished unobtrusively with a few carefully targeted missions of the type of our own Viking experiments on Mars. All these considerations appear to contradict the ETH, that is, extraterrestrial hypothesis, the idea that aliens are physical beings much like you and me." So that's the first argument Vallée makes, and I think that makes a lot of sense. If aliens were beings that are much like us, that just come from different planets, I mean, maybe not necessarily humanoid in form, but sentient physical creatures, then it would be very, very difficult to explain why they would be coming so often to so many different people. It just doesn't make sense. But, given the extra-dimensional hypothesis that the aliens are coming from another dimension, which squares well with my thesis that most of these are demonic, that makes a lot of sense. So his second argument is that the reported appearance of people who claim to have been abducted or had close encounters with aliens is that, to the best of my knowledge, they're virtually all humanoid in appearance. They all have 2 legs, 2 arms, 2 eyes. They all look very, very, very much like us. And Vallée's argument is, given how evolution works, it's highly unlikely that a species would develop on a different planet under different conditions that also had 2 arms and 2 legs, 2 eyes, could survive in our own atmosphere, things along those lines. The idea there being that you'd have different sorts of evolutionary and natural selection pressures on different planets, so you'd wind up with different beings. Much the same as how when you go to the deepest parts of the ocean, you can find life down there, but it looks very, very different than you and I do because it's working under different pressures, different conditions, different parameters. Now, if you don't buy into evolutionary theory, as I know many Christians do not, then this argument isn't going to strike you as very plausible at all. And this is the one argument he makes where I think it is kind of outdated, because to the best of my knowledge, even a lot of evolutionary scientists are now trying to come up with ways of convergence. That is, sure, there's something random and natural about evolution, but where you could run the whole thing again, you'd probably still wind up with creatures like us with 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, etc., etc. The idea being that there's certain parameters that life needs to adhere to which are universal, and so that's why you find, say, deer-like creatures on virtually every continent except for Antarctica. And what I mean by that is 4-legged herbivores that eat the grass that feed higher predators on every continent in the world, except for Antarctica, because Antarctica is so incredibly different. And now, I don't know off the top of my head how widely accepted the convergence idea is, but I know that that's something that a lot of evolutionary biologists and scientists are trying to work toward, because they just kind of see that, hey, these same patterns emerge over and over and over again, even though evolution is supposed to be random. It's similar to how, when you go back to ancient civilizations, a lot of them built pyramids. In fact, that's one of the things that, like, ancient alien conspiracy theorists point to, is they're like, hey, the Mayans and the Aztecs built pyramids, and so did the Egyptians. They were separated by thousands of miles and, at the least, the Atlantic Ocean. How did that technology go from Egypt to Central America? Well, the easy answer to that is that the Mayan and the Aztec builders were attempting to solve the same problems that the ancient Egyptian builders did, the ancient Egyptian engineers were. So they came up with very similar solutions, because the same solution is going to work in Central America as did in ancient Egypt. And that's the most plausible reason why you find pyramid-like structures all over the world, is because it's a very, very good way to build something very, very big with the technology that was available at the time. And so that's kind of similar to what evolutionary convergence idea is, and if that idea is right, then if we ever go out into the universe and there are alien races there, then it would look kind of like Star Trek, where there would be differences, but the basic body structure of most living things would probably end up being, at least most higher living life forms that would be sentient, would probably end up being pretty similar. 2 arms and 2 legs. So this is one argument he makes that I don't think works very well, but you can kind of see his overall point, which is, hey, if there are aliens coming, why do they always look like us? Why do they always look so similar? I mean, they don't look exactly like us, but why do they always look so similar? Why aren't we seeing differences in species? If there are multiple different species of aliens coming, why can't you see that? Why are the differences between reports of what aliens look like so incredibly small? And sure, the convergence theory and evolutionary theory could explain that. And likewise, if you don't reject evolutionary theory altogether and you want to say, well, God created us wholesale 6,000 years ago, and then you could maybe add on, and he also created alien races wholesale that are on other worlds, and maybe some of them are visiting, well, then you could explain, well, hey, maybe God just made us all look similar because it's a good, easy design. But at the same time, another explanation is, hey, these are the same things coming over and over and over again, and they manifest themselves in ways that look like us because that's what we'll recognize and understand. Which, again, fits very, very well with the extra-dimensional hypothesis and my hypothesis that a lot of these are demonic. And in that vein, although this is, I wouldn't classify this as like weak evidence, but it's also not very strong evidence. There is a verse in Revelation, it's Revelation 16:13, that describes demons as looking like frogs. It says, and then I saw 3 evil spirits that looked like frogs. And a lot of descriptions of aliens look like gray frogs. So that one I wouldn't say is like a strong argument. It may have been strong 30 years ago when he made it, but the theories have kind of moved past that now. Although it plausibly works, I'd say there for either explanation. That one plausibly works under evolutionary convergent theory for the extraterrestrial hypothesis, but it also works for the extra-dimensional hypothesis and consequently the demonic hypothesis. Valle's third argument is that the reported behavior in thousands of the abduction reports contradicts the notion that these are advanced alien races doing some kind of genetic or scientific study or experimentation on human beings. The aliens are reported to do medical and scientific experiments upon abductees that are reportedly very, very painful and even to the point of being torturous. Now, that should be very, very odd if these are advanced beings coming from another planet, because if they have the technology to somehow travel the vast, vast distances in the universe, somewhere upwards of sometimes 100,000 light years or more, then why is it that they don't have the technology to do their scientific experiments and scientific studies in ways that are not so incredibly painful and torturous? Because we now currently have the medical technology and doctors have the medical training where they can gather blood samples and tissue samples from you in ways that, well, maybe they're a little discomfort. You wouldn't call it painful to the point that you're going to suffer PTSD and would compare it to torture. Likewise, for most scientific and medical experimentation we would do on the human body nowadays, we know, for the most part, ways we can do it that are not extremely painful. So how is it that aliens that have figured out to either like break the laws of physics and teleport across the universe, or travel faster than light, which current physics say should be impossible, that they don't know how to do that? Or perhaps even worse, they don't want to do that. The suggestion there is either they don't know how to do that, or they know how to do it and they're so malicious and evil that they don't care and they just want to inflict pain on us, which is horrifically terrible, because we even give anesthetic to our dogs and pets, things that we don't consider sentient and have the same human value life as we do. We view it as that there's something terribly wrong if saw a kid, like, say, pulling wings off the flies to torture them. Now, I kill flies when they're in my house because they're annoying, they're pests. But I know there's something horrifically wrong with torturing animals and other creatures, even if they're such lesser creatures that like flies are to me, where I don't think flies should be considered sentient or given any moral value. There's still something horrifically wrong with the idea of torturing them. And these aliens that are supposed to be a super advanced race either haven't figured out how to do all their experimentation without torturing people, or they don't care, or they actually want to torture us, that doesn't fit very well with the extraterrestrial hypothesis. But Vallée argues it fits very, very well with the extradimensional or interdimensional being hypothesis, and I would argue that's exactly what you should expect from demons. Demons are malevolent, evil creatures who only want to inflict pain and torture and keep you from Christ, and they're going to do that just because that's what they want to do. Not for some other purpose. They're going to do that just because they're evil. So it seems to me that that's one check against the idea that these are extraterrestrial aliens, or at the least what it would show us is these extraterrestrial aliens are malevolent or evil, because it's hard to comprehend how you could have that level of an advance of technology and not also be able to do simple things like taking tissue samples and blood without torturing people. Now, in that same vein, when people have claimed to have close encounters where they've actually talked with aliens or seen them and things like that, the aliens not only do things that seem bizarre if they were extraterrestrial, they say things which seem bizarre if they were extraterrestrial. It's widely known that people who have abduction experiences or close encounter experiences and get into like UFO culture, that there's a close association with that and the occult. Now, that's kind of bizarre because you would think, well, advanced sci-fi stuff doesn't really mix with occultic practices, but often the two are found together in that if somebody's interested in one, they're usually interested in the other. And in that same vein, a lot of the people who report aliens talking to them through alien abductions and things like that, well, the aliens seem awfully obsessed with telling people that Christ is not God and to do away with other primitive religions and things along those lines. Now, this part wasn't reported in Vallée's paper. I've picked this up from other research I've done on the matter, but the problem here is, well, suppose these are extraterrestrial aliens with just really advanced technology. Why would they really care about what kind of religious practices we have here on Earth? Why would that matter to them? Now, if they're like trying to document how our society works, they might ask questions and maybe even ask probing questions, about these kind of things to get more information. But why would they care about saying, no, Christ isn't God, and do away with your primitive religions, and steer people toward religious practices that are more in line with the occult and Eastern mysticism and things like that? That's not the kind of thing that it seems like a very advanced civilization from another planet who's viewing us as primitives. Why would they care? It just seems bizarre. Even if, like, say, the aliens were extraterrestrials and they were ultra convinced that, like, our religious practices are evil or harmful in some way, like some atheists on the internet claim they are, well, again, why would they care? We're stuck on our planet here. We can't get to where they are, so even if the aliens were, like, convinced, we're going to hold a crusade against them, well, we can't. We can't get to where they are. So, again, why would it matter to them? And this, it seems to me, is a very, very strong piece of evidence in favor of the theory I've got that most of these things are probably demonic, because that fits very, very well with what demons would say and do to people. In fact, it fits very well with what demons are reported to actually do and say with people. Go look up interviews with exorcists, and if you're going to do that, I highly recommend you look up interviews with the exorcists who are Catholic priests, just because it's not that there aren't other Christian denominations who can do exorcisms. In fact, the Catholic priests who are exorcists will tell you that. It's that the Catholic Church maintains a certain level of control and legitimacy over who does exorcisms, so it'll be a little bit easier to find somebody who's not like a fringe and wacko if you look to the Catholic priests first there. Other denominations, I'm sure, have people who do exorcisms or function as exorcists that are perfectly legitimate and calling on the name of Christ in all the right ways and things. You're just going to have an easier time finding one who's legitimate if you do that. Well, I've watched some of these interviews. These exorcists all report that one of the demons' primary activities, one of the things they're most interested in doing, is telling people, Christ isn't God, your God is dead, we don't stop serving him, and things along those lines. And so in that vein, what these aliens are doing seems far more in line with demonic activity than it does with what extraterrestrial activity would be. And very similar to that, Gary Bates, in some of the research he's done, has reported that some people have actually been able to resist abduction by the aliens, and he says it's people who seem to either have very, very strong wills or who call on the name of Christ when the aliens come. And maybe that was a Freudian slip there, because I'm pretty convinced most of these alien encounters are demonic, but, well, if it's really just an advanced extraterrestrial species and they're using advanced technology to come and abduct you, how strong your will is should not make a difference. Likewise, it shouldn't make a difference if you call on Christ to save you, if that's what's going on. But, again, if these are demonic, calling on Christ for help and assistance, calling on Christ to save you, that should have a big, big effect on what the demons are doing. And I think it might be a little bit of a controversial theological claim to say that people with very strong wills could also resist, but again, that does seem to fit better with a demonic hypothesis, absent any theological controversy there, than it does with an extraterrestrial hypothesis. Because how strong your will is should not make a difference if it's like aliens who have something like a transporter or teleporter technology out of Star Trek. You can will yourself against that all you want. It's not going to make a difference. But reportedly, it has made a difference in at least some cases. Now, a fourth argument that Vallée makes is the extension of this phenomena throughout recorded history. And what he says is that this demonstrates that UFOs are not a contemporary phenomenon. And what he means by that is you have stories that are very, very similar to abduction stories in recorded history from all kinds of different cultures. You have recorded instances where people saw weird things in the sky and things like that. It's just they didn't usually castigate it as UFOs. They would castigate it as, oh, these are the demons, these are the gods. And maybe if it was like a malevolent thing, they'd say it's the evil spirits or the evil gods and so on and so forth. And what he's saying there is, look, whatever this is, it's been happening for a long time. And when you look at more ancient cultures, they wrote about it and castigated it in the language and culture of their time. So we in contemporary society, most of us are very secular and suspicious of anything supernatural. So when we see something weird, we're going to look for scientific explanations, hence UFOs and aliens from other planets. Where these previous cultures, when they saw something weird or had like an abduction-like experience, they would think, oh, this is the spirits, it's the gods, it's the demons, and they would write about it in that sense. And to me, that fits perfectly with the demonic hypothesis, because what Vallée is saying is, hey, all those reported encounters with demons that like you read about in Scripture, well, that was just these interdimensional beings, and the authors of the Bible recorded it through their cultural lens. And I'm kind of saying, well, not quite. They did record it through their cultural lens, but in this case they happen to be correct that it was demonic. His fifth argument, which is the most interesting one in light of the U.S. government report, is the apparent ability of the UFOs to manipulate space and time suggests radically different and richer alternatives. And he outlines some more details. But what he means by this is UFOs have been observed doing things that simply should not be possible under the current laws of physics. One example that's been brought up in light of the videos that have been released of the Navy pilots who've seen these things is some of these have been traveling at supersonic speeds without generating a sonic boom, which should not be possible under the laws of physics. If you move through the atmosphere at greater than, I think it's 700 miles an hour, you generate a sonic boom. Yet these things are not doing that. But at the same time, there is radar data and other things that indicates these are physical objects. So they're defying the laws of physics. In that particular case, it's very, very hard to see how you could claim that, oh, that's just understanding of physics that we don't have yet, because it's just a basic law of physics. You move through the atmosphere greater than a certain speed, you generate a sonic boom. These things are moving through the atmosphere at much, much greater speeds than that. In as much as we can know anything about it, we know they're physical objects from radar data and other things like that, and they're not generating a sonic boom. And in the same sense, these UAPs or UFOs, whatever you want to call them, they're doing things like starting and stopping virtually instantaneously at incredible speeds. They're apparently like jumping from being completely stationary with wind blowing and everything, where they're not moving at all. There's no, the wind isn't moving them around at all, which is virtually impossible. And then they're instantly jumping to supersonic speeds and stuff like that. And this is all being accomplished without any observable wings or propulsion systems on these UAPs or UFOs. Now, some people would want to look at this and say, well, that just argues that whatever these things are, maybe they have a higher level understanding of physics than we do nowadays. Like, we have a better level of understanding of the physics of the universe now than, say, Ptolemy did, which is why we don't use Ptolemaic physics and astronomy anymore. And so maybe it's just they're higher than us like that, but maybe much more so. And in some sense, that's kind of a reasonable explanation. But the fact that they're doing things which we know defies the laws of physics, like supersonic speeds without a sonic boom, that argues to me that that's unlikely, because even if you can accelerate at insane speeds due to your tech, you should still be generating a sonic boom in the atmosphere. So that what that suggests to me is whatever these things are, they're things that are not bound by the laws of physics, which, loosely speaking, means they're probably supernatural, i.e., they're probably demonic. Now, there I am making a little bit of a jump from, hey, they're probably supernatural to they're probably demonic, just because these UFOs are so routinely associated with these alien abductions, and I think we've got very good cause to think the alien abductions are demonic, and the fact that they're so closely connected most of the time suggests to me it's probably the same thing doing both the abductions and the sightings of UFOs most of the time. So that's Vallée's 5 arguments. I think 4 of them are pretty good, and it seems to me when you look at all this data as best as you can, well, like, I'll just use the U.S. government's report, for example. They couldn't explain 143 of these instances. Well, it's pretty likely that of those 143 they couldn't explain, some of them were things like naturally occurring phenomenon. Some of them were probably things where, like, somebody made a mistake or there was equipment failure or something along those lines. So you can probably discount some of them that way, and that's a reasonable assumption to make, I think, because we know that a lot of other instances were explained away like that. Does that explain away all of them? Well, no, probably not. If the U.S. government did extensive research on this subject, and the fact that there's a classified amendment or annex or whatever the term is to this report that was not made available to the public suggests to me they probably did do a very deep dive into this. Well, if they investigated it that thoroughly and said, we can't explain 143 of these, and we're very confident it's not advanced U.S. technology that we're just trying to keep out of the public eye, well, that suggests to me, yeah, maybe some of these other things are going to be explained away by things like natural phenomenon and mistakes and a few other things like that, but it's highly unlikely all of them are explained that way. So that's still going to probably leave you with a very, very high number of instances where it's a physical object that's defying the laws of physics and it's unexplained what it is. And so, given that these UAPs or UFOs, again, whatever you want to call them, are doing things which defy the laws of physics, which suggests they're supernatural, that the aliens themselves, when people come into contact with them, seem to have a very malevolent sense about them. They seem to do evil things. They seem to torture people for no good reason whatsoever. These aliens also seem to be obsessed with telling people to get away from the, quote, primitive religions and not serve Christ, and telling them that Christ isn't God. It's reported that some people can resist these abduction attempts by either calling on the name of Christ or having particularly strong wills. These supposed aliens have been coming to Earth way, way, way too often just for doing scientific study, and for some bizarre reason mostly at night. Well, given all that, what I'm proposing is that a much better explanation of the bulk of this phenomenon is that these are just demonic entities that are masquerading as aliens because it's a convenient way for them to hide or masquerade what they're actually trying to do, which is just lead people away from Christ. Either through, I think Gary Bates puts it that it's like a demonic deception where they're just trying to get people focused on aliens rather than on Christ. And that seems like a reasonable hypothesis and seems to fit with what demons would do. And so that's roughly my claim is, look at all this data, weed out the pieces that are weak or have other explanations, and then when you look at what's left, well, the bulk of it's probably just demonic activity trying to lead people away from Christ or prevent them from coming to Christ. Because so much of the data that UFO researchers have compiled, and now even the U.S. federal government has compiled, just doesn't fit very well with the hypothesis that these are extraterrestrial beings that are coming here for scientific study or other purposes like that. There's something very, very other, something very, very unlike us about these UFOs and aliens, which fits much better with the hypothesis that these are demonic entities than it does with that they're just aliens from another planet, like in Star Trek, Mass Effect, or Star Wars, or something like that. So that's my theory on why most, or at least many, reported alien encounters are probably just demonic. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have another theory that you think fits better with all the phenomenon that we're observing and that the U.S. government has now compiled and studied? As always, write in, let me know what you think about it. You can reach me for any kind of comment at theexaminedlifewithphil@gmail.com. Reach out to me over the Facebook page if you want to find me there, just The Examined Life with Phil. And as always, if you like what I'm doing here on the podcast, give me a like or a rating or review, whatever's appropriate on the podcast app you're using so we can get it out to more people. And my family and I are actually in the process of moving to a new house within the next couple of weeks, but I'm still going to try really hard to get more podcasts out. I do apologize that I've been falling behind on my once every 2 week schedule. It's just what happens when there's so many things going on in your life when you're moving and have 2 kids under the age of 5. And I'm not trying to complain. I'm just saying, hey, I know that I'm not getting these out as fast as I said I would, and I apologize for that, but I'm going to keep at it and keep getting you more. I'm very, very confident that next episode I will do something about stories again, but I guess I shouldn't make that promise since I said that's what I was going to do last time and not this time. As always, thanks for listening, and if you have any feedback, I welcome that.
The mission of Holy Apostles College and Seminary is to form faithful witnesses of Christ. Year after year, the prestigious Newman Guide has recommended Holy Apostles for our academic excellence and steadfast fidelity to the magisterial teachings of the Catholic Church. We are also fully accredited and the leader in Catholic online learning. Our students enjoy the unsurpassed flexibility to study on their own time and anywhere in the world through asynchronous engagement. Holy Apostles is dedicated to the relentless pursuit of truth, which allows students in all academic programs, including undergraduate, graduate, and personal interest, to formulate a coherent worldview based on both faith and reason. The study of the liberal arts also develops and refines key competencies associated with career readiness, such as critical thinking and problem solving, clear communication, collaboration, and a strong work ethic. The tuition rate at Holy Apostles is one of the most affordable in the country. Yearly tuition for a full-time undergraduate is under $12,000. Students at Holy Apostles can graduate with minimal or even no college debt, which enables them to live out their calling as faithful witnesses of Christ without heavy financial burdens holding them back. Please visit www.holyapostles.edu/admissions for more information. The Fall 2021 admissions deadline is Friday, July 23rd. Classes start Monday, August 30th. See you soon.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.